My name is Isabella. To my family, I'm the disappointment who couldn't hack it, the one who left the company in shame, the one they never bring up in polite conversation unless it's followed by an awkward silence and a forced change of subject. But here's the truth I've buried for 20 years under layers of lies, clearance levels, and classified missions. I didn't leave the company, I was recruited. Straight out of a dead-end administrative role at my father's logistics firm, a stranger approached me in a cafe one rainy Tuesday morning. He sat across from me without asking, slid a manila envelope toward my half-finished espresso, and said only 5 words. Isabella Armand, we need you. The envelope contained nothing but a date, a time, and a one-way train ticket to a remote government facility I'd never heard of before. Or since. That night, I packed everything I owned into a duffel bag and disappeared. No farewell parties, no notes, no explanations, just silence. To the world, including my family, I had failed. But in truth, I was becoming someone they could never have imagined. For 2 decades, I worked in the shadows. Counter-surveillance, human intelligence, deep cover. I've worn 6 different faces, died 3 official deaths, and spoken more languages than my father thinks are real. I've sat across from warlords and prime ministers, holding secrets in my smile and knives in my purse. And yet, I wasn't even in the Christmas card photos. My younger sister, Claudia, rose through the ranks of the Air Force with medals and ceremonies my parents fawned over. Every one of her achievements was broadcast across our family group chat. Every holiday gathering was a slideshow of her deployments, her salutes, her proud moments. I was a phantom, a ghost that might as well have never existed. My mother told people I had moved to Portland to figure things out. My father once drunkenly muttered at a New Year's party that I never had the grit. I watched it all from the shadows, sometimes literally behind mirrored glass during security briefings where Claudia's name came up. She had no idea I had pulled strings to ensure her clearance went through. That her promotion wasn't blocked after a scandal nearly derailed it. That someone in a secure location once took a bullet in Bangkok to make sure a top-level exchange went as planned, an exchange her team unknowingly depended on. That someone was me. And now, 20 years later, I sat at her promotion ceremony, in the back row, uninvited, unacknowledged, wearing a tailored black blazer and glasses no one recognized. Claudia stood at the front, radiant in her new uniform, surrounded by applause. Our father beamed with pride. Our mother dabbed at her eyes, sniffling into a silk handkerchief embroidered with Claudia's name. Every seat was filled with people who thought they knew the story. The narrative was simple. Claudia, the golden child. Isabella, the family failure. Until he walked in, the base commander, Major General William Crane. A man I had worked with years ago, back when I was just a shadow with a badge number and no face. His eyes swept the room, and then stopped. On me. He blinked, looked again, and I saw the recognition flash behind his careful military mask. He took a step forward, then leaned to his aide and whispered something. The aide looked over. Then another officer. A murmur began to spread like wildfire through the room, subtle but undeniable. And then the general walked to the podium. He began his speech. It was routine at first, a generic tribute to Claudia's service, commendations, valor, loyalty. But halfway through, his words faltered. His eyes found me again. And then he said it. Before I continue, I must take a moment. I just realized we have a very special guest in the room. Someone whose service has never been publicly recognized. Someone who has shaped the very landscape in which this military operates. Someone I didn't expect to see again. He paused. He looked straight at me. Wait, you're... The room went still. My mother's smile froze on her lips. My father turned his head, slowly. Even Claudia's confident posture wavered. General Crane stepped away from the mic, stared right at me, and whispered, Isabella Armand. It wasn't a question. It was a reckoning. It was the silence that got me. Not the kind that fills a room before applause. Not the dramatic hush before some revelatory moment. No, this was heavier, stranger, like time itself had tripped over my name. General Crane didn't blink, didn't stammer. He just gave me that knowing look, the one that says, "We've both seen things no one else in this room could handle." And me? I just sat there, perfect posture, legs crossed, one hand still resting in my lap. I didn't smile, didn't nod. I couldn't. Because if I did, I'd be confirming something I'd sworn to bury forever. But the damage was done. Every eye had turned. Claudia looked like she'd just seen a ghost in uniform. My father looked confused, almost offended. I imagine it was the first time in his life he felt out of the loop. He wasn't used to not having all the answers, not when it came to me. For 20 years, my family believed I had failed, that I'd quit my job, run off with some doomed ambition, and never quite landed. My mother told people I'd gone off the grid because I couldn't keep a steady job. My sister once joked, within earshot, that maybe I joined a cult in Oregon. The truth? I did leave, just not in the way they thought. After I was approached at that cafe, I disappeared. They didn't even look for me, not really. They assumed the worst, and maybe it was easier for them to hold on to that story than to ask the harder questions. Maybe it made them feel superior, to speak of me in hushed disappointment. In reality, I was undergoing training that would break most people in the first month. I was recruited into a black-tier intelligence program, so secret it didn't have a name, just a code. I became a ghost. My fingerprints were wiped from every system. My academic records altered. My photos scrubbed from social media and family albums like I had never existed. To my family, I was a vanishing act they never bothered to chase. But while Claudia was collecting medals and posing for military newsletters, I was dismantling espionage rings in Eastern Europe. While my father was boasting about her promotion at country club dinners, I was seducing an arms dealer in Marrakesh, planting bugs in his penthouse suite while he slept 2 feet away. I operated in shadows so deep, even my handlers rarely saw me in person. Dead drops, encrypted briefings, silent extraction teams. I was the contingency plan no one ever admitted existed. You've heard the phrase, "she fell off the face of the earth"? That was me. And it wasn't just the missions, it was the sacrifice. I missed birthdays, funerals, weddings. I wasn't there when my cousin gave birth. When my grandmother died, I wasn't allowed to come home. I had been stationed under deep cover in Jakarta, tailing a diplomat who would later defect. No one knew. They couldn't. But I watched from afar. Every family photo they posted online, I saw. Every filtered frame at Claudia's award ceremonies, I noted. I wasn't in a single one. Even in the few pictures I should have been in, grainy old snapshots from before my recruitment, someone always cropped me out, or forgot to tag me, or said, "Oh, I think she took the picture." Invisible. Even before I disappeared. You'd think I'd grow numb, that after all those years, I wouldn't care. But I did. God, I did. I remember the year Claudia graduated with honors. My parents threw a party so grand they rented out a yacht. I was watching from a safe house in Rome, eating cold pasta alone while decoding messages embedded in static radio frequencies. I remember laughing at the absurdity of it all. They thought she was the pinnacle of success, and maybe she was. Maybe she earned it. But I was saving lives, dismantling cells, preventing wars, and no one would ever know. Until now. The silence in that room stretched into something unbearable. Claudia took a step forward. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, or maybe accuse. I don't know. And my father. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, not because I disappeared, but because I had done something important, and he hadn't known. That was the wound he couldn't stomach. Not that I left, but that I had value and he'd missed it. Then General Crane broke the tension. "I'm sorry," he said, turning back to the podium. "I wasn't prepared to see Isabella Armand here today. We owe her more than most of you can comprehend." He paused, and then he did something that shocked the entire room. He saluted me. Full formal salute, sharp, precise, meant for equals. And in that moment, every eye that had once looked at me with pity shifted. I wasn't the failure anymore. I was something else. Something they didn't have a word for. And I wasn't ready for what came next. I arrived 20 minutes early. Old habits. The instinct to surveil, to scan, to know every exit before I sat down. It never left me. Even now, after all these years, I moved like I was still being hunted. Or maybe I just didn't want to be caught needing them again. The base auditorium was buzzing. Polished brass, ironed uniforms, rows of chairs aligned like chess pieces. There were banners with Claudia's name on them. "Congratulations, Colonel Armand," in deep blue and gold, like a royal proclamation. I walked in alone. No +1. No fanfare. Nobody noticed. Well, my father noticed eventually, but he looked straight through me at first. He was talking to someone in a suit, gesturing toward the podium with a drink in his hand, laughing that loud, artificial bark he saves for people more important than him. My mother stood a few feet away, touching up her lipstick in the reflection of her phone. I don't think she even looked my way. It stung more than I expected. I'd seen worse. Felt worse. I've sat alone in interrogation rooms with blood drying on my shirt, waited hours under fake identities, watched false funerals held in my name. But this casual disregard from the people who once taught me to write my name, it went deeper than a bullet ever could. I stepped further in, trying not to draw attention, though the irony didn't escape me. I'd spent 2 decades trying not to be seen. And now, in the one place I might have wanted to be acknowledged, I was just another shadow against the wall. Isabella. Her voice hit me before her presence did. Claudia approached like a parade float, tall, crisp, smug in her tailored uniform. The silver eagle insignia gleamed on her shoulders, and her hair was pulled back into a regulation-perfect bun. Her makeup was flawless. Her tone was not. "I didn't think you'd show up," she said with a faint smile that never touched her eyes. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. My voice was calm, trained. "But, congratulations." "Thanks," she said, drawing the word out like she wasn't sure if it should be received or returned. "Portland's still treating you okay?" There it was. The jab. Still stuck on the lie my parents created, that I moved away after some career misfire and never recovered. The story they told themselves, because the truth would make them feel small. "Yes," I said simply. "Portland's fine." Claudia turned slightly as 2 officers approached, laughing at some private joke. Her smile became real for them, bright and dazzling. "Oh, Colonel Jacobs," she called, grabbing the taller man by the arm. "Come meet my sister." He turned, still smiling. Claudia didn't miss a beat. "This is Isabella. Well, she used to help out at our father's company. Office stuff, right? Clerical things." She said it loud enough for nearby ears to hear. Eyes turned. Conversations slowed. A clerk. After all these years, after all the nights I spent decoding foreign signals, tailing diplomats, slipping microchips into cufflinks, escaping interrogation in places where my name would have been a death sentence, she reduced me to a clerk. I held out my hand. Colonel Jacobs shook it with the polite disinterest of someone shaking a barista's hand at Starbucks. "Pleasure," he said. "You too," I answered, voice steady. But inside? Inside I cracked. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was that older, deeper grief, the kind you only feel when the people who built you start chipping away at your foundation, like they were testing the walls just to see what they could collapse. Claudia's lips twitched. She was satisfied. She turned back to the officers, launching into some embellished story about boot camp, leaving me standing there like a spare part. I walked away before I did something I couldn't explain. The back row was mostly empty. A few older veterans and spouses filled it, people too tired to care about seating hierarchy. I sat between a man with a hearing aid and a woman knitting something blue. From there, I could see the whole room. Claudia stood radiant at the front, greeting guests like royalty. My parents moved through the crowd like campaign managers, introducing themselves as the proud parents of the new colonel, boasting about her achievements as if they personally flew the damn jets. I sipped water from a plastic cup, watched, waited, and just when I thought maybe I should have stayed away, just when I was considering slipping out the side door before the ceremony started, the base commander walked in, and everything changed. I didn't notice the doors open at first. The ceremony was already underway. Claudia had begun her preamble, standing at the podium, polished and proud, her voice echoing confidently through the auditorium as she listed her accomplishments, deployments, training, medals. Her audience, which included a mix of brass and blood relatives, listened with quiet admiration, heads nodding, shoulders squared with secondhand pride. I was just beginning to settle into the idea that I could sit through the whole thing unnoticed when I heard it. The slight shift in breath, a change in the rhythm of the room. People had turned. Whispers crept up the walls like ivy. Then I saw him. Major General William Crane entered the hall not with fanfare, but with a stillness so commanding it drew every eye. He moved with quiet authority, not needing to demand attention because it came to him naturally, earned, not asked for. Crane didn't usually attend ceremonies like this unless the officer in question had earned more than just a promotion. His presence alone meant the stakes had changed. Claudia noticed him instantly. Her eyes lit up. This was her moment. Her time to shine in front of one of the most powerful men on the base. She straightened her spine even more, flashed her best smile, and angled herself toward him, preparing for a handshake, a photo, a legacy. But he didn't stop for her. He scanned the crowd, jaw locked, eyes sharp, until he saw me. Everything about him stilled. His shoulders, his breath, his face. And then he walked. Directly toward me. Not toward Claudia, not toward my parents, not toward the other officers awaiting his greeting. He walked through rows of decorated men and women, civilians and family friends, past VIPs and brass, heading toward the back row where I sat like a forgotten relic. The moment felt suspended in amber. My fingers tightened around the cup in my hand. I rose slowly, my body moving before my mind had caught up. When he stopped before me, the hush was palpable. Not a single throat cleared. Not a single phone buzzed. "General Armand," he said. The name hit the room like a bomb. General Armand, and not Claudia. People turned. Officers glanced at one another, a gasp somewhere to my left. Claudia's voice, mid-sentence, faltered, then stopped. Crane stood tall and unwavering, looking at me with something rare in a man of his rank, respect without performance. He saluted. A full, formal salute. My hands moved automatically, returning it with precision, crisp and practiced. Muscle memory kicked in before my thoughts could interfere. The room had turned to stone. When we lowered our arms, he stepped back just half a pace and gave the smallest nod. The kind you give to someone who's bled beside you. The kind that says, "I see you." "You're a long way from Langley," he murmured, just low enough for me to hear. "Couldn't resist," I replied softly. He smirked, just a flicker, then turned and walked toward the front like nothing had happened. But it had. It very much had. I stood rooted, aware of dozens of eyes on me. Officers who didn't know my name now whispered it like a question. "General? Who?" What did she say her name was? Claudia's speech had resumed, but it was unraveling. "And, as I was saying," she stammered, flipping a note card with shaking fingers. I've served with, I've had the honor of leading." Her voice trailed off again. The tight smile on her face began to twitch. My sister had always been good at pretending, but not today. Not when her forgotten failed sibling, the one she introduced to guests as a former clerk, had just been saluted by a four-star general in front of the entire command. I saw my father's head whip toward me like someone had slapped him. My mother's face had gone ghostly white, her hand frozen in midair with a cup of tea that hadn't moved in minutes. The rest of the ceremony went on like a script someone else was forcing them to read. But everything had changed. After the applause, after the flag presentation, after the obligatory photos and forced laughter, there would be questions. There would be confrontations. But for now, for the first time in 20 years, they looked at me, and they saw me. The guest room they gave me was cold and quiet, a stripped-down space of discipline and duty. Government issue everything, gray carpet, a single narrow bed, one lamp, and a desk that looked like it hadn't been used since the Cold War. I dropped my blazer over the back of the chair, kicked off my shoes, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. I sat down, ready to unpack the whirlwind of the day. Then I saw it. An envelope, cream-colored. No postage, no name. Just Isabella Armand, typed across the front in a bold sans-serif font. The kind used by people who want to look official without giving themselves away. I froze. It hadn't been there earlier. I would have seen it. My training wouldn't allow for oversight like that. Someone had entered the room, without tripping the lock, without leaving a trace, which meant they knew what they were doing. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once, unmarked. I unfolded it slowly, my breath held without meaning to, and then I read, "You think you've won, but people died in San Cristobal, General, civilians, children. You walked away with your record clean because your friends buried it, but not everyone forgets. There are witnesses, reports. You are not untouchable, and soon the committee will know what you did." My stomach turned, but my hands remained steady. San Cristobal, God, that mission. The op was one of the most delicate I'd ever commanded. 6 months of deep cover in a city teetering between cartel rule and political collapse. I posed as a language consultant at a local media firm while gathering intelligence from a series of encrypted exchanges between known traffickers and rogue diplomats. We shut them down, clean, precise, bloodless. There were no civilian deaths, and I would have known, because I was there for every second of it, every extraction, every step. The accusation wasn't just a lie, it was personal, purposeful. And whoever wrote this didn't just want to smear my record. They wanted to undo everything I was finally reclaiming. Only one name came to mind. Claudia. She had the access, tangential, but enough to pull broad details. She had the motive, she had the timing, and she had the perfect camouflage. Family pride. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair, rereading the letter in the dim light of the desk lamp, the buzz of fluorescent bulbs like a low drum in my skull. My mind picked through the language, the precision, the vague threats masked as whistleblower concern. It wasn't written by someone outside the system. It was written by someone inside it. Someone who'd spent a lifetime learning how to weaponize language and bureaucracy. Someone who knew I'd never make this public. Not without looking guilty just for defending myself. Someone like my sister. By the time the morning sun sliced through the thin blinds, my choice was made. I wasn't going to run. Not from her lies, not from the past. Not from the fear that someone would believe her. I was going to walk right into the party she thought she'd won, and let her look me in the eye. The officers' club was already filled when I arrived. Claudia was radiant again, hair done, makeup flawless, metal gleaming at her chest like it had never slipped. She floated between guests like a born leader, shaking hands, laughing, glowing with controlled charisma. But she saw me. Oh, she saw me. Her posture didn't break, but her smile did, just for a second. Just enough. I didn't wait for her to come to me this time. I walked straight up to her. She was mid-conversation with 2 lieutenants I didn't recognize. Junior officers who stood at attention the moment they saw me approach. The younger one's face shifted from confusion to near awe. Claudia tried to recover. "Oh, Isabella, I wasn't sure you'd make it." "You left me a note," I said, voice calm, just loud enough for only her to hear. I figured it was a formal invitation. The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her pupils dilated. I leaned closer. "You used San Cristobal. You really think that'll stick?" "I think truth has a way of rising," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Eventually, everyone learns what's behind the curtain." I stepped back half a pace. "You should be careful." "And you," she said, voice lower now, "should have stayed in the shadows. That's where ghosts belong." That broke something in me. Not because of what she said, but because I realized, then and there, she really believed it. That no matter what I had done, no matter how much blood I'd spilled to protect people like her, she would always need me to be lesser. Because the alternative meant reckoning with the fact that I was more. I gave her one last chance. One last opening. "Why?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eyes. "Because," she said softly, "you weren't supposed to win." It was her truth, and her mistake. Because now I knew exactly what she was willing to do, and what I was going to do about it. The call came at 12:17 a.m. 3 rings, secure line, no ID. I was awake, of course. Sleep had become more of a suggestion than a necessity over the years. I'd been staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its dull, mechanical rotation, when the phone buzzed beside me. I didn't hesitate. "Armand," I answered, instantly alert. "Ma'am, priority red. You're listed in an active breach." The voice belonged to Captain Dreyfus, one of the few I still trusted. I sat up straighter, blood turning to ice. "Source: Joint Intelligence Relay, South Bay Node. 15 minutes ago, someone accessed Level 6 files on Operation Night Key. Entry came from a buried clearance string, tied to your inactive Euro 91 Delta handheld." I blinked. That device had been issued to me in 2009. I hadn't touched it since Kandahar. It had been officially destroyed. I'd logged the incineration myself, placed it into the furnace chute, and watched it burn. "Impossible," I said aloud. But even as I said it, something twisted in my gut. It wasn't impossible. Not for someone who had trained with me, watched me work, learned to mimic. "What data was pulled?" I asked, already moving. My go bag was in the closet, always ready. I unzipped it and pulled out my private SSD drive. Encrypted 3 layers deep with a system only I could break. 2 files, Dreyfus replied. One marked OPK Vault, the other tagged Recon Secondary. Both contained details from your San Cristobal file. The attempt was cut mid-transfer, but not before a trace was left. "And they used my dead credentials?" "Yes, ma'am, and the routing ID piggybacked off base infrastructure. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Are they notifying oversight?" "Not yet. Flags locked under Black Echo Protocol until Euro 600. You've got 5 hours. "I need 6. A pause. Then, "You've got 5.5. The line went dead. I plugged my SSD into the government-issued laptop and began working. My fingers moved on instinct. Every keystroke was a return to muscle memory I hadn't used since Berlin. Back when I had to hunt a mole through an embassy firewall with one hand bandaged and my alias falling apart in real time. This time, the mole was family. Within minutes, I confirmed it. The breach used a clone of my ghost credentials. A digital forgery, nearly flawless, but not perfect. There was a hitch in the timing signature, 3 nanoseconds of latency embedded into the proxy mask. I smiled without meaning to, because I recognized it. It was hers. Claudia had used her base terminal to clone one of my decommissioned signature trees. She'd piggybacked the packet through a shadow node, a hidden military relay line I'd once used to redirect intel from Moscow to Langley. Only 2 people in the world knew that node even existed. Me, And the woman I once tried to protect from a court-martial after she left her terminal open at NATO headquarters. My sister. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding like war drums. The betrayal felt cold now, less like a knife, and more like a slow, clean incision, almost surgical. She'd done this deliberately, meticulously. Framing me for a top-level security breach wasn't just desperation, it was annihilation. She knew I wouldn't survive it politically, not with my record, not with the skeletons in my file that weren't mine, but were always near me. And she knew the government wouldn't bother to look twice. They'd bury me in secrecy before ever admitting someone like me existed in the first place. Claudia was trying to end me. I took a breath, closed my eyes. Then I reached into my encrypted archives, the ones I'd never officially stored, the ones they didn't know I kept. Buried deep under 3 levels of access codes and a biometric gate keyed to the tremor in my left pinky, I found it. A full recording of a training session from 2011. A briefing I'd led on cyber espionage protocols. In the background, barely visible, barely audible, stood a younger Claudia. Watching, taking notes, asking questions about how to replicate a trace without leaving one. I had warned the group. This only works if you're sloppy. Your fingerprint always follows you unless you build a glitch into the mimic. She had built the glitch, just the wrong kind. She learned from me, and now she was trying to use it against me. I stared at her voice in the waveforms, the ghost of her laugh, the soundbite that would become my shield, and if I needed it, my weapon. I sat very still for a long time. Then I whispered, "You forgot who taught you." Outside, the night was silent. But inside, the war had started by morning. The base felt different, colder, still, like the air itself was waiting for something to fall apart. When I walked into the situation briefing room, everything stopped. Not because of rank, they were used to generals, but because of silence, because of the contradiction of my presence. For 20 years, I didn't exist. And now, I was the one holding the reins. The room was small, windowless, functional. 1 long table, 6 chairs, no coffee. At the head of the table, I placed my tablet, synced it to the projector, flashed up a secured screen that read, Black Echo Internal Probe 912A. And then I turned to see them walk in. My father entered first. Still tall, still buttoned up in an immaculate gray blazer, he probably thought screamed power. He looked at me like I was a brief he hadn't had time to read. His nod was curt, civil, a formality. "General," he said. Not Isabella, not daughter, just general. The word hung in the air, half choking on itself. Next came my mother. She didn't say anything, not right away. She walked in, eyes scanning the room like she was taking mental pictures of the furniture. Her arms folded across her chest. Her heels clicked once with each step, then stopped as she chose a chair away from both me and my father. Her face was unreadable, except her jaw, tight as a vice. And then Claudia. She didn't wear her dress uniform. She came in civilian clothes, gray slacks, white blouse. Her hair still pinned back, but with none of the crispness it had during the ceremony. Her eyes met mine only for a second, before she looked down and walked past me. She sat at the far end of the table. I looked at them, my family, and said the words that made the room shift. "You've been selected for a joint internal investigation task force under Directive 912A. My mother blinked. "Excuse me?" My father scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Surely that's a conflict of interest." "Exactly," I said. "That's the point." Their confusion was almost funny. I turned to the screen. This breach wasn't external. It came from someone with access to private family-level credentials. Someone who understood dormant access routes tied to my past fieldwork. That narrows the pool to exactly 3 people. They all froze. "Are you suggesting?" my father began. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm leading an investigation. If I uncover external involvement, so be it. But if it's internal, I want to see it up close. I want to look it in the eye. I turned the screen again, loading the anonymized packet of the breach logs, scrubbed of specific names, but laced with timeline markers only I understood. My mother's eyes narrowed at the screen. My father crossed his arms. Claudia didn't even raise her head. I assigned roles without giving them the chance to object. Dad, you'll handle administrative traceback. Compare base-level entry and exit logs from the last 72 hours to known personnel movements. Mom, you'll audit surveillance backups from the South Wing data hallway. Claudia, I hesitated. She looked up finally. You'll shadow me. You'll see exactly what I see. I saw her flinch. It was slight, a ripple, not a quake, but it was there. For the next 4 hours, we sat in that room, and for the first time in my life, they were forced to see me as something more than the lost daughter, the invisible sister, the failure. They saw me at work. I issued commands without asking permission, delegated tasks with confidence. I translated strings of code in real time, identified data misalignments before the software could ping them. My mother didn't speak, but I saw her watching me, closely, her usual reserve slowly giving way to something she didn't know how to name. My father corrected me once, then fell silent when I disproved him with a single keystroke. Claudia remained quiet, taking notes, avoiding my eyes. But I felt the tension in her posture, like she was coiled too tight inside her own skin. At 3:12 p.m., I found what I was looking for. A copy of the forged credential signature, logged into a secure access locker at 2:03 a.m., 3 hours after I'd locked down the relay. Impossible, unless someone had admin override or had replicated my biometric signature. Only one person in that room had the clearance. Only one person had spent years studying how I built digital walls. I didn't say it out loud, not yet. But I turned off the screen and looked across the table. Claudia's knuckles were white around her pen, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Not shame, not guilt, fear, because she knew. She was no longer dealing with a sister she could erase. She was now face to face with the woman who could dismantle her, and everyone in this room knew it. There's a rhythm to hunting a ghost. Most people look for what's visible: names, timestamps, faces, and cameras. But when you're chasing someone who knows how to disappear, you don't look at what's there. You look at what's missing. That's how I found the Trojan. After the briefing with my family, after I saw the fear on Claudia's face, I should have felt vindicated, but something didn't fit. The code she'd unknowingly triggered, the ghost signature, was too intricate, too layered in misdirection. Claudia wasn't smart enough to build something like that, but I knew someone who was. In the oldest vault of the base's internal data cloud, buried under layers of firewall logs and mirror image redundancies, I found it. A rogue data pocket from nearly 2 years ago, sealed within a routine system update package. Harmless looking. But when I cracked it open, I found a script embedded with a modified recompiler, a digital Trojan. It was sleeping until it detected a biometric match to me, and it had only one purpose: simulate a high-level security breach under my name. Whoever wrote it had access to my legacy credentials and biometric profile. Whoever wrote it had spent years watching from the margins, building a virus tailored not to steal, but to destroy. When I pulled up the metadata, my heart froze. There, in the code's DNA, was a unique command signature I hadn't seen in over a decade. Antonov Tiao 13, Malik Antonov. We'd trained together, served together, then separated violently after Cyprus. He was brilliant, arrogant, resentful, always whispering about glass ceilings and the bureaucratic show ponies who rose too fast. I had risen faster than anyone, and he never forgave me. When he was forced out of the agency after bungling an extraction op in Dubai, an op I'd salvaged, he dropped off the grid. Not rogue, exactly, just forgotten. But now I knew he'd been waiting. The trail led me through 7 firewalls and a cascade of false access points before pinging an IP logged from a location I recognized immediately. A seedy roadside motel just outside San Diego, once used as a dead drop point in an old op we'd both worked. Of course he chose it, a message, like all his games. I didn't call for backup. This wasn't a black ops breach. This was personal. I drove through the night, engine humming steady beneath my hands. The letter Claudia had left me was folded in the passenger seat, untouched. Her guilt was still real, but now I saw the bigger picture. She hadn't created the bullet. She'd just pulled the trigger on a gun someone else had handed her. Room 12 was at the far end of the motel. Paint peeling, curtains half closed. A buzzing neon sign outside flashed "Vacancy" in sputtering red letters like a warning light. I didn't knock. The door opened a second before I touched it. Malik stood in the frame, arms crossed, wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt and that same smug look I remembered. The one that said, "I already know how this ends." "You made good time," he said. "You made a mistake," I replied. He smirked, stepping aside. "That's not what the logs say." I stepped into a room lit by the pale glow of 6 monitors. Cables ran like veins across the carpet. His terminal still hummed, screen flashing with the code signature I'd just tracked. The remnants of the breach, still warm. I turned toward him slowly. "You targeted me through my sister." "She was already halfway there," he said. "I just gave her a push." "You gave her the gun." "She wanted to be seen, wanted to win, just like you once." I crossed the room and stood over the monitors. The virus he'd built was elegant, invasive, almost poetic in how precisely it mimicked my command line style. It was more than sabotage. It was an act of artful destruction. "You always said I was lucky," I murmured, "that I rose too fast." "You did." "No, I rose because I didn't wait for someone to hand me a ladder." He looked at me then, not with anger, but with something colder, envy that had calcified into contempt. "You were supposed to break," he said. "You were supposed to fall apart when they stopped calling. But instead, they turned you into a ghost general, their pet myth." He turned to the window, voice low now. "I just wanted to remind them what happens when they let legends write history." I stepped forward until I was close enough to smell the burnt coffee on his breath. "You didn't hurt me," I said softly. "You just gave me proof." I pulled a recorder from my pocket, hit play. His confession played back in his own voice, the bitterness, the plan, every damning word. He didn't flinch. "You're not going to turn me in." "Why not?" "Because that would mean explaining how you got here, explaining what you did to earn that ghost status, and you can't afford that, not without unraveling your own myth." He was trying to call my bluff. He didn't realize I wasn't bluffing. I leaned in, voice like ice. "I'm not going to bury you, Malik. I'm going to give the tape to Claudia. Let her decide." His eyes flickered. "She needs to know who really loaded the gun, and when she does, she'll know exactly what kind of soldier she wants to be." I walked to the door, paused. "You picked the wrong ghost to haunt." Then I left him standing there. In the dying light of a motel room filled with wires, betrayal, and the beginning of his end. The report was 11 pages long, typed in Claudia's usual precision. No dramatic flourishes, no plea for sympathy, just facts, admissions, and a single final paragraph where she took full responsibility for her role in the breach. She submitted it at 09:47 hours. No ceremony, no last-minute edits, no legal review. She requested to deliver it in person to the Internal Review Board. The hearing lasted just under an hour. I didn't attend. I waited outside, in a corridor, where the walls echoed with the soft shuffles of officers passing, none of them daring to make eye contact. My hands were clasped behind my back, my posture disciplined, even as something in my chest tried to tear open. When the board emerged, they passed by without a word, but their expressions said everything. Not pity, not anger, just the quiet weight of respect. Claudia came out last. Her shoulders weren't squared anymore. Her chin wasn't lifted. But her walk, it was steady. We didn't speak. Not yet. She nodded once, as if to say it's done, and walked past me. The official statement from the board came down later that afternoon. Her promotion to brigadier general was withdrawn. Effective immediately, she was reassigned to a civilian advisory post in the Department of Operations Liaison, a role with a title that sounded important, but was quietly, firmly, a dead end. She wouldn't wear a uniform again, but she wouldn't go to prison either. The board acknowledged that her actions, while reckless, had not been criminal. Malik Antonov had been the architect. She had been the entry point. Intent mattered. But so did consequences, and hers would follow her the rest of her life. When the statement was made public, it didn't mention me. As usual, my name was absent, my role omitted. But people whispered. I heard them. The ghost general came back. That night, we were invited, no, summoned, to a closed-door debrief with senior command. A formality, they said, but everyone knew what it really was. A reckoning. My family arrived together. We sat in the same room we had used for the internal investigation. Same walls, same table. But now the air felt different. Less electric, more fragile. Claudia sat beside me, my mother across from her. My father hesitated at the door, then entered. He looked older today. Not just aged, tired. The way people look when their illusions finally run out. When the room settled, no one spoke, until he did. He cleared his throat. No preamble, no self-importance. I need to say something. We all looked at him, even Claudia. He stared at the center of the table for a long moment before speaking. I was wrong, he said. The words dropped like stones in still water. I was wrong about what happened 20 years ago. About you, he added, turning to me. About what you became. He took a shaky breath. I told people you failed. I told myself it too. Because that story, it was easier than admitting I didn't understand you. That I didn't know how to raise a daughter who didn't follow the path I imagined. He looked at me now. Really looked. No armor, no posture. You didn't fail. You protected people. You served this country in silence. And you did it alone. I'm sorry I never asked why you left. I'm sorry I didn't wait for the answer. His voice cracked. Just once. And I'm sorry that it took a scandal to see you. I didn't respond right away. Because those words, the ones I'd wanted since I was 21, since the day I walked out of our house with a duffel and a fake name, they hit harder than I was ready for. I wanted you to be proud, I said finally, even when you didn't know where I was, even when you told everyone I was nothing. I was proud, he said softly. I just didn't know how to admit I was wrong. Across the table, my mother shifted. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placed it gently on the table. I saved every article, she said. Everything I ever found with your name buried in some redacted report. I kept it quiet, even from him. But I knew. I opened the folder. She had clipped pieces from foreign papers, coded footnotes, anonymous commendations, scribbled notes in her handwriting that said things like, "Is this her?" and "matches the Lisbon op." I thought maybe, she said, eyes misted now. Maybe you weren't lost. Maybe you were just somewhere, being extraordinary. It was the closest she'd ever come to saying she loved me. Claudia finally spoke, her voice steady but low. I filed the report because I couldn't keep living in the lie I created. I thought that by destroying you, I could finally be more than your shadow. But you weren't a shadow. You were the light. Her voice cracked, and she looked down. I'm sorry, Izzy. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say it. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. It was trembling. It wasn't all you, I said. You were angry. But someone gave you the match. That fire wasn't yours alone. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. But I lit it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clean, a kind of peace I didn't think we could ever reach. We talked that night, really talked, about the years between us, the stories we never told, the weight of silence and the damage of ambition, about the damage we all caused just by not saying the truth sooner. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that's all we need. I stood backstage in a black suit, no insignia, no stars, not tonight. The lights beyond the curtain were blinding. Rows upon rows of delegates, commanders, foreign attachés, analysts, and journalists waited with notepads and whispers. I'd been asked to speak at the Strategic Command Summit before. I'd always declined, but this year they didn't ask. They invited, by name. I stepped onto the stage in total silence, and then they saw me. Not the myth, not the ghost. Me. There was a slight intake of breath across the auditorium, like watching a phantom appear in daylight. I adjusted the mic and looked across the crowd. I spotted Claudia in the third row, her notepad open, pen in hand, no uniform on her shoulders, just a pale blue blouse and unflinching eyes. She met my gaze and gave the smallest nod. It grounded me. "My name," I began, "is Major General Isabella Armand. For 2 decades, I served in a unit that does not exist." A few murmurs rippled through the rows. I let them settle. "I was recruited at 23. At 24, I vanished. For 20 years, I was listed as inactive, reclassified as a resignation due to failure to integrate. That was the official story." I paused. "And my family believed it." I turned and clicked the projector. A single slide appeared, a grainy satellite image of a quiet village in Central Asia. This was my first operation. My cover identity was so complete, even my DNA was pulled from official records. I watched the world burn and mend from the edge of every map. I learned 14 dialects. I operated under 9 aliases. I was injured 3 times. I saved lives. I ended others. I walked out of places no one else walked into. Another slide. A photo from 10 years ago. No names, just silhouettes. Shadows. These were my brothers and sisters. None of them will speak today. Some of them never came back. I turned back to the crowd. The cost of silence is not just secrecy, it's erasure. It's being deleted from the very history you helped write. Claudia's hand stopped moving. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was listening, really listening. My silence hurt people. It hollowed out relationships. It gave space for lies to grow, for others to define who I was, for my family to believe I was a failure. I let that settle, the weight of it. But silence also saved lives. And today, I want to talk about the difference between secrecy and shame. I walked slowly to the edge of the platform. Some of us serve quietly because the world depends on it, but we must be careful that silence doesn't become abandonment, that protection doesn't become disappearance. I took a deep breath. This is the only time I will speak publicly, not because I want recognition, but because I want the truth recorded. Because ghosts deserve a story, too. The applause was slow at first. Then it built. By the time I left the stage, the entire room was standing. Except Claudia. She was still seated, head bowed slightly, hands folded in her lap. And I knew why. She wasn't clapping for what I had done. She was grieving what she never knew. That night, for the first time in over 20 years, I invited my family to my home. My home, not a safe house, not a holding room, not a secured compound. A place that had curtains, books, a coffee table with uneven legs, photographs I'd taken but never shown. Walls painted in colors I chose myself. They arrived just after 8 p.m. Claudia wore a sweater she'd borrowed from me as a teenager. My mother brought homemade soup. My father brought nothing, just a guarded expression and 100 unsaid things in his eyes. I made tea. We didn't talk for the first half hour. We just sat, listened to the clink of spoons and the hum of a playlist I'd forgotten was still on. Then I cleared my throat, and I began. I told them about Prague, about the man who recruited me on a bridge at dawn, wearing a coat too thin for the winter. About the oath I took, the one that didn't involve parades or flags, but silence and sacrifice. I told them about Lisbon, where I hacked a diplomat's mainframe in a hotel room while pretending to be asleep next to him. About Syria, about Berlin, about Jakarta. I told them about the rescue op in San Cristobal, the one Claudia nearly buried, the one that had haunted me not because of guilt, but because I had never been able to tell anyone we'd succeeded. I showed them scars, not just the physical ones, the emotional geography of 2 decades without a home base. They asked questions, tentatively at first, then, slowly, with more urgency. Did you ever want to come back? Did you miss us? Why didn't you call? Because I couldn't, I said, and because you believed I failed. And part of me believed it too. There were tears, silent ones. No one sobbed, but they came. From my mother, from Claudia, and then, shockingly, from my father. I told everyone you left because you weren't strong enough, he said, voice cracking. But the truth is, I wasn't strong enough to admit I didn't know where you went. I reached across the table, took his hand. It's okay, I whispered. You know now. He nodded, eyes misted. We all do. After dinner, my mother pulled out a camera, an old digital one. Just one, she said. Please. We stood in the living room, in front of the fireplace, Claudia at my side, our shoulders brushing, my father behind me, a steady hand on my back, my mother fiddling with the timer, grumbling about buttons. Then she rushed in, just in time. The flash went off, and I was in the photo, visible, present, real. No longer cropped out, no longer erased, just Isabella, a daughter, a sister, a soldier, a woman who disappeared to protect the world, and returned to rebuild her own. Life didn't return to normal. It built something new. After the summit, I received dozens of invitations, lectures, panels, think tanks. Most I declined. I wasn't interested in fame. That wasn't the point. But I accepted one invitation, then another, then a few more. Not because I needed recognition, but because I realized something vital. Silence had protected me once, but it had also erased me. It had erased others, too. Brilliant agents, brave soldiers, people whose stories would never be known. I could be a voice for them, so I spoke, not as a ghost, as Isabella Armand. My first lecture was at the War College. The room held 70 cadets, all straight-backed, starry-eyed, and terrified of saying the wrong thing. I told them about failure, about silence, about why heroism is lonelier than they think. And after it ended, I saw her, Claudia, sitting in the back row. No notepad this time, just listening, really listening. Afterward, she waited for the crowd to clear before walking up to me. You were better than last time, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Constructive criticism? She smiled, hands tucked into her coat. You're teaching me, every time. She never missed a lecture after that. At first, I thought it was guilt. But eventually, I saw what it really was. She was relearning me, brick by brick. And somewhere along the way, she found a part of herself again. Not the officer. The sister. My mother mailed me a letter every month. Sometimes it was just a recipe. Sometimes it was a clipped article with, "This reminded me of you," scribbled in the margin. My father came to 2 of my talks, sat in the front row both times, never spoke during the Q&A. But afterward, he would shake my hand with eyes that said everything he didn't know how to say aloud. And my photo? It stayed on the wall. No longer an artifact, just part of the family. One crisp October morning, after a lecture at a military academy in Colorado, a young cadet approached me, barely 20, still wearing the polish of someone who hadn't seen war yet, but already carried questions too big for his age. He looked nervous when he spoke. General Armand, he asked, what's the hardest part about war? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, at the trees bowing gently in the breeze. Then I said softly, learning to live without becoming a monument. He blinked. I don't understand. You will, I said gently. Someday. And when you do, I hope you still feel human. He nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling in. And then he smiled. Thank you, ma'am. As he walked away, I stood still, the echo of his question lingering. Not everything needed to be explained. Some truths had to be earned. That night, I returned to my home. Not a bunker, not a hideout, just my home. The lights were warm, the floor creaked, the windows rattled in the wind, and for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone complete. Not the ghost, not the myth. Just me, Isabella, living. Not as a monument, but as a woman who came back from the silence and chose to be heard.